If you grew up in the 1970s, you know that the radio played things that were genuinely strange, songs you couldn't explain to anyone who wasn't there, sounds that came out of nowhere and embedded themselves in your brain permanently. Some were funny, some were unsettling, and some were just inexplicable. Here are the 1970s 15 weirdest songs Gen X can't forget. Number 15, Signs by Five Man, Electrical Band, 1971. Five Man Electrical Band were a Canadian rock group from Ottawa, and Signs was their commercial breakthrough. Written by Les Emerson and released in 1971, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in June of that year. The song is a protest against signs, the physical signs that post instructions, prohibitions, and social rules, delivered from the perspective of a long-haired traveler who finds himself unwelcome in the world that those signs represent.
Do this, don't do that, can't you read the sign?
The song had actually been released in 1970 as part of the album Goodbyes and Butterflies without significant commercial impact. A re-release through Lionel Records in 1971 caught the attention of radio programmers who recognized something specific about its timing. The friction between the counterculture and the mainstream establishments of the early 1970s was still a live commercial subject, and Signs addressed it with a directness and an accessibility that more earnest protest songs lacked. Tesla covered Signs in 1990 and took it to number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. For Gen X listeners who encountered the five-man electrical band version on 1970s radio, the song connected the long-haired teenager being told to cut his hair before entering the restaurant, a situation many of their older siblings or parents had actually experienced, to the broader friction between counterculture and establishment. Les Emerson and the band faded commercially after this peak. The song survived them by decades. Number 14, Baba O'Reilly by The Who, 1971. Pete Townshend wrote Baba O'Reilly for The Who's next album, released in August 1971. The song was salvaged from a more ambitious multimedia project called Lifehouse that Townshend had conceived but found too complex to realize, a science fiction narrative about a future in which people live in suits feeding them artificial experience. Lifehouse was abandoned, but the songs written for it became Who's Next, one of the most celebrated albums in rock history. The song opens with a synthesizer pattern, Townshend playing an ARP synthesizer in a repeating figure that was generated by feeding information about the Indian spiritual teacher Meher Baba, one of Townshend's major influences, into the instrument. The approach was inspired by the minimalist composition techniques of Terry Riley, whose piece A Rainbow in Curved Air, 1969, had deeply influenced Townshend. The title combines the two names, Baba from Meher Baba and O'Reilly from Terry Riley. The synthesizer opening of Baba O'Reilly is one of the most immediately recognizable sounds in 1970s rock. For Gen X listeners who encountered it on FM radio or on The Who's next album without any knowledge of the synthesizer composition approach or the Lifehouse concept, the song sounded like something arriving from a genuinely different musical world. The synthesizer pattern, the organ, Keith Moon's drums entering at full power, and Roger Daltrey's voice delivering something that felt urgent and barely contained. The teenage wasteland of the lyric was not a phrase Townshend invented randomly. It referred to the social condition of the Lifehouse world's isolated youth. But for every teenager who heard it, it meant something considerably more immediate. Number 13, School's Out by Alice Cooper, 1972. Alice Cooper, the band fronted by Vincent Damon Fournier, who took the name of the band as his own stage name, released School's Out in June 1972. The song reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 in the United Kingdom. It was timed for release at the end of the American school year, which was not a coincidence. The marketing strategy was explicit about connecting the song's subject matter to the commercial moment. Cooper had been building a reputation for theatrical shock rock throughout the early 1970s, working with producer Bob Ezrin and building stage shows that incorporated guillotines, electric chairs, and various forms of theatrical violence. The specific quality that Schools Out added was mainstream accessibility. The song's subject matter was universally understood, its hook was immediately effective, and its radio friendliness gave it a broader audience than the theatrical live shows alone could have reached. The song became an annual radio ritual in the United States, United Kingdom, and many other countries, played at the end of every school year for the following decades as a specific marker of the summer's arrival. For Gen X listeners, Schools Out was one of those records that meant something specific to their experience of childhood, rather than just their experience of music. Alice Cooper, Vincent Furnier, has been sober since the late 1970s after treatment for alcoholism, and has continued performing consistently. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2011. The song is played every summer regardless. Number 12, Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, 1972. Deep Purple recorded Smoke on the Water at the Casino in Montreux, Switzerland, in December 1971, with the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio, the same truck used for Exile on Main Street. The casino had caught fire during a Frank Zappa concert before Deep Purple arrived, when someone in the audience fired a flare gun toward the ceiling. The fire destroyed the casino and forced the band to relocate. They eventually recorded at the Grand Hotel Montreux. Roger Glover, the band's bassist, wrote Smoke on the Water, specifically as an account of these events. The fire, the smoke drifting over Lake Geneva, the practical problem of finding a place to record. The lyric is a documentary account of a sequence of events, which is a somewhat unusual basis for a rock song. The guitar riff that opens the song, one of the most taught and most played guitar figures in the history of the instrument, was written by Ritchie Blackmore and is based on parallel fourths rather than the power chords that would have been the conventional choice. The song was released in the United States as a single in 1973 and reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. For Gen X listeners learning electric guitar, the Smoke on the Water riff was typically among the first things they learned, which means the song's relationship with that generation has as much to do with picking up an instrument for the first time as with hearing it on the radio. Number 11, Suffragette City by David Bowie, 1972. David Bowie released Suffragette City as part of the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars in June 1972. The album presented a sustained fictional concept, Bowie playing Ziggy Stardust, an alien rock star delivering the last message from a doomed civilization. And the songs on it were all written within that frame. Suffragette City is one of the album's most purely energetic recordings, a glam rock song about sexual competition and displacement, delivered at high volume by a band performing at its peak. Mick Ronson's guitar arrangement and production on Ziggy Stardust, he served as both lead guitarist and co-arranger, gave the album its specific sonic character. The glam stomp, the orchestrated sections, the way the recording sat between rock and theater without being fully either. Ronson died in April 1993 from liver cancer at the age of 46, and his contribution to the Bowie recordings of 1971 and 1972 has been consistently acknowledged as central to their quality. For Gen X listeners who encountered Ziggy Stardust through older siblings or FM rock radio, the entire Bowie persona, the ambiguous gender presentation, the theatrical costumes, the fictional alien narrative, was genuinely unusual in the context of what rock music had been offering. Suffragette City was the most energetically straightforward track on an album full of strange and beautiful things. Number 10, Roundabout by Yes, 1971. Yes released Roundabout as a single in January 1972 in the United States, taken from the Fragile album. The single version was edited from the album track, which ran 8 minutes and 33 seconds, to approximately 3 minutes for radio. Even the edited version retained enough of the song's complexity. The acoustic guitar introduction, the John Anderson vocal harmonics, Chris Squire's bass playing, Rick Wakeman's keyboard work. to communicate that this was categorically different from conventional rock radio. The song reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was one of the first progressive rock singles to achieve significant American chart placement. Roger Dean's artwork for the Fragile album, his first association with Yes, featuring the floating organic landscapes and stylized typography that would define the band's visual identity, gave the visual package a coherence that matched the music's ambition. For Gen X listeners, Roundabout occupied a specific place in the landscape of 1970s rock radio, a song that was technically demanding and structurally unusual enough to signal that its makers were operating in a different register from the standard hard rock and soft rock of the surrounding format. The bass figure that opens the song, Squire playing through Marshall amplifiers and a Rickenbacker bass with a signature aggressive tone, is one of the more distinctive sounds on 1970s FM radio. Yes, cycled through significant lineup changes through the decade, but Fragile and Close to the Edge, 1972, remain the most completely realized statements of the classic lineup. Number 9. Come On Feel the Noise by Slade, 1973.
Come on, feel the noise.
Slade were a Wolverhampton glam rock band who had been one of the most commercially successful acts in the United Kingdom in the early 1970s. They had achieved 6 consecutive #1 singles in the UK between 1971 and 1973, a record equaled at the time only by the Beatles. Come On Feel the Noise was released in March 1973 and reached #1 in the UK within a week of release, the fastest-selling single in UK chart history at that point. In the United States, Slade's commercial reception was more limited. They were never as dominant in America as in the UK, but their recordings were heard on FM rock radio and found an audience among the Gen X demographic that was beginning to encounter rock music in the early 1970s. The deliberate misspelling of "come" and "noise" in the title was characteristic of Noddy Holder's specific approach to commercial songwriting, making something that was immediately accessible while marking it as distinctively theirs. Quiet Riot recorded a version in 1983 that reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Slade's original had not charted in the American Top 40, and Holder and Hill received their most significant American royalties from a band they had never seen. The deliberate misspelling survived every version.
Come on, feel the noise.
Number 8. Rock and Roll Part 2 by Gary Glitter, 1972. Gary Glitter, born Paul Francis Gadd, released Rock and Roll Part 2 in 1972, and it reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song functions almost entirely as a participatory chant, a drum pattern, a repeated chord sequence, and glitter calling out to the audience. The lack of conventional song structure gives it a specific utility as an arena crowd anthem that melodic recordings cannot replicate. Gary Glitter was convicted of child sex offenses in 1999, sentenced to 2 years in prison, and has subsequently been convicted of further serious crimes in both the United Kingdom and Vietnam. He was convicted in 2015 of multiple charges of historic sexual abuse and sentenced to 16 years imprisonment. The song's continued use at sporting events and in commercial contexts has been progressively discontinued, as the nature and extent of his crimes has been established. Many sports organizations and broadcast entities have removed it from their libraries. The song is included here as a historical record of what was on Gen X radio in 1972, not as a recommendation. Number 7. Radar Love by Golden Earring, 1973. Golden Earring were a Dutch rock band who had been recording since the early 1960s and who achieved their most significant international commercial success with Radar Love, released in September 1973 in Europe, and reaching number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States in 1974. The song runs 6 minutes and 29 seconds and is built around a driving rhythm section, Barry Hayes' vocal, and George Kooijmans' guitar work. The song's specific subject matter, a man driving through the night toward his partner, connected to her by a kind of telepathic awareness he calls radar love gave it an unusual combination of romance and momentum. The driving rhythm was literally mimetic of driving, and the song became one of the more frequently cited driving songs in rock culture. It has appeared on more driving and road trip compilation albums than any accounting could fully catalog. For Gen X listeners who heard it on FM radio in 1974, Radar Love was one of those songs that seemed to arrive from somewhere outside the American rock mainstream. The Dutch origin, the slightly different production quality, the song's unusual length, and that embedded itself through repeated listening on the specific format of FM rock radio that was building its audience through the mid-1970s. Golden Earring had further European hits through the decade but never matched Radar Love's American penetration. Number 6. Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede, 1974. Hooked on a Feeling was originally recorded by B.J. Thomas in 1968 and reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. The version that Gen X can't forget is the 1974 recording by Blue Swede, a Swedish pop group, which added the Uga Chaka vocal chant to the opening that transformed a moderately successful American pop song into one of the most instantly recognizable recordings in the history of oddly memorable radio hits. Blue Swede were a Swedish band led by Björn Skifs, who would later be known primarily for his work as a solo pop artist in Sweden. They recorded Hooked on a Feeling for EMI Sweden, and it was released internationally in early 1974, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in May 1974. A number 1 hit in America for a Swedish band with a recording that had taken a B.J. Thomas song and added a chanted introduction that had no precedent in the original. The Uga Chaka introduction was borrowed from Jonathan King's 1971 cover of the same song, which had itself added it. Blue Swede took King's addition and made it the central identifying element of their version. The result is one of those recordings that is impossible to hear without the chant arriving first, regardless of whether you're listening to the original Thomas version or any of the dozens of subsequent covers. The 1994 film Guardians of the Galaxy opened with the Blue Swede version in 2014, 40 years after its release, and introduced it to an audience that had not been born when Blue Swede recorded it. The chant was just as strange in 2014 as it was in 1974. Number 5. Bicycle Race by Queen, 1978. Queen released Bicycle Race as a double A-side single with Fat Bottomed Girls in October 1978. Both songs were from the jazz album. Bicycle Race was written by Freddie Mercury, who had been watching the 1978 Tour de France from his hotel window and wrote the song partially as a result of that observation. The single reached number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 11 on the UK singles chart.
I want to ride my bicycle.
The song's promotional campaign involved a bicycle race of 65 naked women around Wimbledon Stadium, footage and photographs from which were used in the promotional materials. The inner sleeve of the jazz album included a poster of the race participants, which resulted in the album being sold in a brown paper bag in some markets and the poster being separately age-restricted in others. The bicycle bell, played by Mercury on an actual bicycle bell purchased for the recording, is one of the more unusual instruments to appear on a major rock hit, appearing in a way that is both absurd and completely committed. Mercury's vocal performance shifts registers multiple times, including falsetto sections that give the song a quality of relentless energy the bicycle bell grounds in physical comedy. For Gen X listeners, it was genuinely confusing in the best possible way. Number 4. Ballroom Blitz by Sweet, 1973. Sweet were a British glam rock band, Andy Scott, Steve Priest, Brian Connolly, and Mick Tucker, who had been producing hit singles since 1971, initially relying on material written by professional songwriters Nicky Chinn and Mike Chapman. Ballroom Blitz was released in September of 1973 and reached number 2 on the UK singles chart. It reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1975, when it was released in the United States. The song is a description of a concert that turned violent, with Steve Priest's spoken intro delivering the setup in news report format before the full stomp of the arrangement takes over. Brian Connolly left Sweet in 1979 as his health declined, and died in February 1997 at the age of 51. Mick Tucker died in February 2002. Andy Scott has continued performing under the Sweet name. The Runaways recorded Ballroom Blitz in 1977. Number 3, Hocus Pocus by Focus, 1971. Focus were a Dutch progressive rock band. Jan Akkerman on guitar, Thijs van Leer on keyboards and flute, Bert Ruiter on bass, and Pierre van der Linden on drums, who released Hocus Pocus on their second album Moving Waves in 1971. The single version reached number 9 on the UK singles chart in 1973 and number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973. The full album version runs approximately 7 minutes. The single version runs approximately 3.5 minutes. The song consists of a hard rock arrangement over which Thijs van Leer alternates between flute, keyboard, and one of the most unusual vocal approaches in the history of rock singles, a combination of yodeling, operatic singing, and wordless vocalizing that has no conventional description. Van Leer does not sing words in Hocus Pocus. He makes sounds. Those sounds include high-pitched squeals, yodeling breaks, guttural rhythmic exclamations, and sections of apparent operatic phrasing. This is not unusual by the standards of avant-garde composition. It is extremely unusual by the standards of a top 10 single in 1973. For Gen X listeners who encountered Hocus Pocus on FM radio in 1973 without any context, the song produced a specific quality of confusion, that of hearing something that could not be described and that bore no resemblance to anything else in the format. Ackerman's guitar work is technically exceptional, and the song's hard rock framework is entirely professional. The vocal approach is something else entirely. Van Leer has said in interviews that the yodeling was inspired by classical Tyrolean yodeling, and that he considered it a form of instrumental technique rather than conventional singing. The song was eventually featured in an American television commercial, introducing it to an audience who encountered the yodeling without warning. Number 2, Werewolves of London by Warren Zevon, 1978. Warren Zevon released Werewolves of London on his second album Excitable Boy, produced by Jackson Browne, in January 1978. The song reached number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100. Zevon had been a journeyman musician and songwriter for most of the 1970s. He had written songs for other artists, worked as a session musician, and struggled with severe alcoholism before Browne essentially rescued his career by producing Warren Zevon, 1976, and the follow-up Excitable Boy. Werewolves of London was written by Zevon with Leroy Marinell and Waddy Wachtel as a deliberate joke, a song about werewolves ordering beef chow mein at Lee Ho Fook's restaurant in Soho, London, grooming themselves and terrorizing London with a combination of animal menace and bourgeois social aspiration. The piano riff that opens the song, one of the most recognizable in rock, was played by Zevon himself. Jorge Calderon provided additional musical assistance in the writing sessions. The song's specific quality is the deadpan delivery of absurd content in a musical setting that is otherwise entirely serious. Zevon sings about a werewolf doing things that werewolves do not conventionally do, visiting restaurants, maintaining their appearance, without any tonal signal that the absurdity is intentional, which is precisely the joke. For Gen X listeners in 1978, Werewolves of London was one of those songs that was impossible to explain but impossible to ignore. Zevon died in September 2003 from mesothelioma at the age of 56. His final album, The Wind, was completed with the knowledge that he was dying and was released 1 month before his death. Number 1, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, 1975. Queen released Bohemian Rhapsody as a single in October 1975. It was produced by Roy Thomas Baker and the band. The recording took approximately 3 weeks to complete and used over 180 individual vocal overdubs for the operatic section. It runs 5 minutes and 55 seconds. Nobody had released anything like it as a commercial single before. Freddie Mercury had been working on the song for several years before the band recorded it. The three-part structure, ballad section, operatic section, hard rock section, had no precedent in commercial pop music. EMI wanted the song edited to a conventional 3-minute running time. DJ Kenny Everett at Capitol Radio was given a copy with explicit instructions not to play it. He played it 14 times in 2 days. EMI released it unchanged. The song spent 9 weeks at number 1 on the UK singles chart. After Mercury's death in November 1991, he died one day after confirming his HIV-positive status publicly. It was re-released and reached number 1 again, raising money for AIDS research. After the 2018 biographical film Bohemian Rhapsody, it became the most streamed song of the 20th century on Spotify. For Gen X listeners who were children or teenagers in 1975, hearing Bohemian Rhapsody for the first time on radio was one of those experiences that left a permanent mark. The operatic section, a conversation between multiple vocal characters, sounded like nothing that was supposed to be on commercial radio in 1975. The hard rock section that followed it sounded like nothing that was supposed to follow an operatic section. The ballad section that opened it was beautiful in ways that had no connection to what the song then became. It was, and remains, one of the most genuinely strange things ever to spend 9 weeks at number 1. If any of these just started playing in your head, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more lists like this one waiting.